Hello and welcome everyone to this virtual event organized by the Technology Executive Committee named From Needs to Implementation. And today we will launch 3 publications made by the TEC, which focus on different aspects of climate technologies, namely from the technology needs to the implementation of them. And this virtual event will also be recorded, so it's able to see afterwards, just for your information. So just short about the program of today. So we will hear a presentation about each of the 3 publications, and then there will be a panel discussion. And then we invite you, the audience, to send in questions to the presenters. And in the beginning and in the end, we will use the online polling tool Menti to know more about you and to make this event more interactive. So I would like to ask you to already now to open a browser tab and go to the website www.menti.com. But I will give more instructions and a code you need for that just a bit later. You can open a web browser with menti.com meanwhile. So if you wonder who I am, my name is Sarah Nyberg, and I'm active in the youth environmental organization Push Sweden. And I was asked to be the moderator for today's event and representing Yango. So I have been involved in Yango, the youth constituency to the UNFCCC since 2017. Currently, I'm representing Yango in one of the TEC task forces and have been an observer at the 2 TEC meetings last year in Copenhagen and in Bonn. And I just finished my studies in environmental and energy engineering and have a large interest in climate technologies. Before we start the Menti poll, the chair of the Technology Executive Committee, Maria Husney, will say some opening remarks. So a bit about Maria. He is from the Maldives and has been following the UNFCCC negotiations over the last 5 years. He was with the chair of the IOSIS in the process, and he currently works at the Ministry of Environment as Assistant Director, where he works with climate policy and research. He joined the TEC in 2016 and is currently chairing the TEC for the year 2020. So please, Maria, you can unmute yourself and the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everybody, and good day to everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this launch event for publication of the Technology Executive Committee. For those who have not heard about us, we are the policy arm of the technology mechanism, which was established in Cancun in 2010. And the name implies we are focusing on identifying policy measures and providing recommendations on the climate technology policy work. I would also like to thank all of us for taking us to your time to participate in this virtual event, and we are fully aware the situation of COVID-19 has presented challenges for many of us in the way we work, we live, and including the way we interact with each other. And yet, it should not be an excuse for climate action and to move towards a much more greener world, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance resiliency throughout the world as the economies grow back from the edge of COVID-19. The TEC is also continuing its work this year despite the pandemic, implementing our rolling work program, and we have adopted last year and responded, provided guidance by the parties of the UNFCCC. We had our first TEC meeting for this year in April virtually, where we made on few important decisions to proceed our work in this area. In this year, we have provided an update of our work in work during the June Momentum, which was held by the chairs of the both subsidiary bodies in the co-presidency. We are now pleased to launch 3 publications as mentioned by Sarah, who is kindly agreed to moderate the session for us. The result of our work since last year. The publication covers broadly 3 topics that are interlinked, starting with the first one where we can learn from the technology need assessment process. The next publication will discuss about the technologies can be effectively implemented through the innovative approaches. And the third one, which goes into sector-specific perspective and showcasing examples of technologies in coastal zone. And we are also proud to join this TEC Brief hand with the WIM Executive Committee on Loss and Damage to produce the joint policy brief of the coastal zone. And I thank all the colleagues in the TEC and the observer organizations who have actively engaged in the work producing this publication. I also especially would like to thank our younger representatives who have kindly agreed as to facilitate the discussion for the event today. And I encourage your participation, active participation in this event. And I pass the floor to Sarah. Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Maria, for those opening remarks. So as you see on the screen, we'll now have a poll through Mentimeter. You go to the website www.menti.com, and there you add or insert the code 277637. So I might wait a few seconds so that you are ready to do that. And now I can see that the first question has been launched. So yeah, so we use this Menti to know a bit more about you who are attending this webinar and to get into the topic. So the first question is, which region do you come from? So please to respond to that question. And we will soon see some of the results coming in here. And yeah, I'm waiting a bit more to give you a bit time to vote. We're simply curious about, yeah, which region do you come from? Yeah, so I saw on my screen, yeah, a little bit more than half of Europe, but then we have certainly a spread, quite even spread across both Asia, South America, Australia and Oceania, and also Africa. I'll wait a little bit longer to see more results coming in. We hope you can make it work to vote through Menti. And yeah, it seems, even if more votes coming in, seems to be similar to this. So we go to the next question. What kind of organization do you work for? So you can choose up to different options. So please submit your response there. And yeah, I can already here see that we have some replies coming in. We're just curious to see, because we know that the recommendations from the publications are targeted to different types of organizations, both national government, we see a lot of people from national government, but also academia, business and industry, and so on. And yeah, still more votes are coming in, but we see, yeah, mainly people from national governments. Second place around academia, business and industry, and then a few from UN organizations. Might be some of the organizers which are also voting perhaps. Yeah, also civil society, nice to see, and NGOs and IGOs. Yes, so welcome everyone. I think we will soon go to the next question. In the third question, and it is, what's in your mind when you think of climate technology? And yeah, please answer in maximum 2 words. And there's a you can maximum have 25 digits or 25 letters. Please submit the reply here. And the results is shown in a word cloud. So we see that if many people write the same words, the word will expand and be larger than the other ones. And we can already see now that renewable energy is quite big. So it seems to be a common climate technology which people think about. But we also have many other names or other climate technologies coming in. We see mitigation is also larger than the other ones, and innovation. A few others, I maybe cannot read all of them, but we see everything from solar PV to early warning to broad definition. Yes, you can see climate technology as a quite broad definition. It entails many different types of technologies. I see also emission reduction, small scale, ground level measurements, and so on. Best solution. Yeah, nice. Thank you for your contributions. Yeah, so now we have a little bit of a common understanding what climate technologies are about. So yeah, we will start with the presentations. And after the presentation and panel discussion, we will pick some questions from you in the audience. So you can actually write some questions now already, and also during the presentations in the Q&A box. So in the bottom you see Q&A. You who join via broadcast, and there you can submit your questions and we will pick some of them. So the first presentation today is about the 13th TEC Brief named Enhancing Implementation of the Results of the Technology Needs Assessments. And it will be presented by Sara Kjærup, and she's the head of section on technology transition and systems innovation, which is part of the UNFCCC partnership. She's an expert in the processes around climate technologies, their enabling frameworks, and the international policy and context around it. Sarah focuses on the provision of research based on advisory support on developing countries' technology needs, tailored to different international, national, and local partners. And she is a member of the TEC Task Force on Implementation. So please, Sarah, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity here to present this TEC Brief on enhancing implementation of the results of the technology needs assessment. Before I go into the brief and present the content of it, I just want to say a few words about the TNAs. The TNAs are a set of country-driven activities to identify and assess key priority technologies for both mitigation and adaptation. And it's a process conducted in close to 100 developing countries by now. And most of these have been funded under the Global Technology Needs Assessment project by the GEF. So next slide, please. So why was this policy brief prepared? Well, as part of the TEC rolling work plan for 2019 to 22, the TEC prepared in 2019 a paper on experiences, lessons learned, and good practices in preparing and implementing TNAs. And after that, the TEC decided that they would prepare a policy brief based on that paper. And the paper and then the brief discuss the gaps, challenges, and good practices of TNA implementation process. It is clear that countries are implementing the priority technologies identified throughout the process, but it is also even more clear that they do have challenges in reaching implementation of those technologies. So the brief also provides examples of how countries have successfully progressed on the implementation of these priority technologies. It looks at the factors that have been clearly outspelled for those technologies that have been implemented, both during the TNA process stage and also after completing the list of priorities and articulated what we call technology action plans. What have countries done to sort of move ahead with implementing these technologies? And then lastly, the brief presents a discussion of the ways and means for improving the TNA process and helping in the aim of helping developing countries create and enhance the conditions for the implementation of technologies. And this includes capacity building and so forth. Next slide, please. So going a bit more into the gaps and challenges that are identified and presented in the brief, there is a lack of domestic capacities in countries to facilitate the implementation of the technologies. It is something that comes clearly out when countries are asked how they can move ahead, and they say, okay, we need further capacity building in preparing project proposals, in facilitating funding for the implementation of these technologies. And that is very evident also from the second point here. Access to funding is a key challenge for, I would say, all countries that have articulated their technology needs. And of course, the countries are trying to engage funding institutions in the early stages when they prepare their projects and proposals with key technologies, but it is challenging to have adequate involvement of the funding institutions. Furthermore, the approaches may not be considered enough implementation oriented, those that are outlined in the technology needs assessment and the technology action plans needs to be strengthened in terms of being implementable proposals and projects that can be considered by funders, but also by the national governments. Then there is the challenge of the frequency of TNAs. For many countries, it's been maybe a one-off or a two-times event by throughout the last 20 years or so. But as we all know, technology needs change. Some may have been implemented and new technologies come up in the markets. And now that countries also have their nationally determined contributions, clearly it is evident that there is a need to continuously update their technology needs assessments in sync with the updated NDCs. Then we have, as was also mentioned above, the engagement of funders with the TNA teams, and also a mismatch sometimes between what the countries have identified as their priority needs and what the donors are including in their country programs, for example. So how to align those priorities and the technology priorities in the TNAs comes from the countryside, and how can you create more discussion and involvement of donors, so donors take these on board when they prepare their projects and country programs. Then as a final point, monitoring and evaluation, it's not included in the TNA process, such as the one funded by the GEF. It is some voluntarily activities done by countries and led by the UNFCCC Secretariat and often in close collaboration with the UNEP-DTU partnership. So there's no sort of resources for actually track what is being implemented from the TNAs. And that is a challenge because if you want to show good examples and lessons learned and so forth, it is necessary to track and learn from what has been done in the past. And this is one of the aims, you can say, that this brief is aiming towards. Next slide, please. So the brief includes several examples of TNA implementation from countries that have participated in the global TNA project. One of the front-runner countries is Lebanon, who have implemented various projects based on the work they did during their TNAs. But one of them is rainwater harvesting from greenhouse rooftops. And what Lebanon was excellent in doing was to engage stakeholders throughout the whole process. So they really managed to create the national ownership and got the government on board to actually implement some pilots, big building on the TNAs. There's also an example from Mauritius, but I'm not going to go into that. There are more information in the brief. So next slide, please. So there are also identified and outlined in the brief various ways to enhance implementation of the TNAs. It is key that the TNA teams in countries continuously engage with stakeholders, with ministries, and create the national ownership of the process and the priorities going out from the TNAs, because it is in the end also the governments that need to create the conditions that enable the transfer and diffusion, and not least the uptake of the technologies. Then it is also key that the TNAs and technology action plans are co-developed and integrated in other national processes, such as the NAMAs, the NDCs, but also in forming project pipelines that can be submitted to the GIF, the GCF, and for example, the adaptation fund. Then there's also, it is key to develop pilot projects that can demonstrate the benefits from the technologies and their implementation. And we also see a close link with technical support from the CTCN that can enable countries to go a step further when they have completed the TNA process. Then, as mentioned, it's key to engage possible funders at an early stage of the TNA process. And it is also, and foremost, really a key way to enhance implementation if countries have what we would call national champions to take on the priorities coming from the TNAs, because someone have to take the work forward and carry it on to the next stage. Next slide, please. There are in the brief outlined more specific ways to enhance implementation throughout the domestic, the regional, and financial means, but I would encourage you all to take a look at the brief and also potentially in the background paper to this brief. So I won't go into details for that now, but it is also clear that I just want to say a final thing is that it is really key to have the capacity building of national institutions to access funding for the implementation of the technologies. And it is especially evident for LDCs and SITs that this come out clear. Last slide. And as I said, you can find much more information in the brief. It is accessible on the TT Clear website. I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have related to the technology needs assessments and the brief. So I'll end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation about this tech brief. And yeah, if I should mention one key takeaway that I got at least is that funding is very important, and also that it's important to update the TNAs. Because things are changing all the time, especially in, for example, renewable energies, the technologies developing and the technologies get cheaper. So yeah, thank you for those insights. So we go directly to the next presentation. It will be about the publication Innovative Approaches to Accelerating and Scaling Up Climate Technology Implementation for Mitigation and Adaptation. And it will be presented by Stephen Minnes, and he's the Vice Chair of the TEC, a member of the EU team in the UN climate negotiations, and a legal academic specializing in climate change and energy law. and Stephen holds a doctorate in law from King's College London. So please, Stephen, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And can I begin simply by thanking everybody who contributed to this particular TEC publication, which of course I can briefly introduce here, but I really do encourage people to take a look at. So this is our paper on innovative approaches to accelerating and scaling up climate technology implementation for both mitigation and adaptation. And now can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So very brief structure, the background to the paper, what do we mean when we talk about innovative approaches, and also some of the key messages of the paper. Next slide, please. So the background here, first of all, innovative approaches. We are not here talking about technology innovation per se. We are talking about innovations in the organization and approaches to scale up, accelerate the diffusion of existing technologies. So there are a number of important types of innovation in our field, and here we are talking about innovative approaches to scale up technologies. So obviously the Paris Agreement is calling for international collaboration on both technology development and transfer to support the Paris goals. The importance of accelerated technology development and transfer has also been recently recognized several times by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a very important actor in this field. And what this particular paper is aiming to do is to inform policymakers and everybody involved about these innovative approaches to scaling the uptake of existing climate technologies. Next slide, please. So the objective of the paper, in a little bit more detail, it aims to identify innovative approaches for scaling development-ready climate technology solutions, policy recommendations to countries, relevant stakeholders, not limited to countries. The particular aims you see here, providing information on the current state of play in respect to innovative approaches, presenting an overview of activities which are underway. And here, the case studies of the paper are very helpful in showing practically how these different innovative approaches can be brought into reality in a very real sense, in a variety of very different settings. Identifying key enabling conditions, of course, always important, and as I have said, providing key messages and recommendations. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned at the start here, we are talking about deploying existing technologies, and we are explicitly taking a systems approach. What are the interventions in systems which can have the effect of scaling, accelerating the uptake of climate technologies? So, of course, national contexts, systems of organisation and governance, enabling conditions as well, very important. And of course, we look at various aspects in that regard. And we identify a number of particular kinds of innovation which our case studies relate to. How technology options can be selected by countries. And of course, we've just heard about technology needs assessment, a very important mechanism in that respect. How stakeholder views and practitioner knowledge and preferences are solicited in the planning process. And there is an important role for both qualitative and quantitative approaches. And one of the case studies in the paper, for example, talks about the Trans Risk Project and how that worked in Kenya to identify technologies that stakeholders were interested in. Financial innovations, which are existing to enhance funding for technology projects and programs, and we'll come to that in the context of green bonds. And finally, viable ways of enhancing private sector engagement, as well as technology incubators to encourage entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So we look at these different innovative approaches from the perspective of how they can accelerate the technology journey to take existing technologies which have been proved, which have been demonstrated, and accelerate the path from deployment in the first instance to widespread diffusion. And what we see here is a way of illustrating that these different interventions have different roles to play at different stages of this technology journey. But of course, there are also cross-cutting elements which are relevant to the whole of the technology journey, and these relate to institutions, measuring progress, proper planning processes, and so forth. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just give you one of our case studies to illustrate what this paper means in terms of practical possibilities. And what we know is that making finance sustainable is a very important driver of the acceleration of climate technology deployment. And there are a variety of mechanisms and legislation and other policy tools which are being applied around the world on making finance green, making finance sustainable. And one of these is the creation of green bonds. And this is a financial instrument which is particularly relevant for mature, tested technologies where you're not trying to simply attract high-risk capital, but you're essentially seeking funding for tested technologies. And bonds are a proven way to do that. Now, the interesting thing about green bonds is that although this market was started by the multilateral development banks, in recent years, we have seen a major growth in the issuance of these bonds by countries, sovereigns, but also corporations, commercial banks, and using standards which have been developed by market actors as well as by NGOs. And now, of course, we see a number of public actors developing standards of their own. And the case study in our paper is from Fiji, the nation of Fiji, which was the first developing country to issue a sovereign green bond, which is being applied, or rather the proceeds are being applied to both mitigation and adaptation projects. And this green bond is following the green bond principles, one of those existing principles which has broad buy-in and acceptance by public and private financial institutions alike. So a very interesting case study. Next slide, please. Now here I will be a bit more brief. One of the effects that the innovative approaches we discuss can have is to help balance the division or the balance of effort between government and private sector actions in the deployment of climate technology. Now, what does that mean? What we have found is that the least developed countries tend to be very reliant upon public finance and government action, government-to-government collaboration, bilateral and multilateral collaboration. Now, if we apply some of the innovative approaches that we talk about, what we expect is to further attract market actors and private actors into the technology ecosystem of that particular country. So that, of course, you still need government intervention and international assistance, but you also have a greater involvement from private stakeholders. Next slide, please. So the key messages, just to wrap up, of course, looking for that more balanced collaboration between both public and private actors, and that is very important, particularly in the area of financial support, but across the board really. Engaging stakeholders early and ongoing is vital as we see the TransRisk project. Again, it is a long paper. I urge you to read it. I hope it is of interest, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for your presentation. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about that case study, about the green bonds in Fiji. And yeah, I think it was very clearly presented. So I would just like to say a reminder that if you want to pose a question, you can write it in the Q&A box and we'll pass it on to the panel later on when we have the Q&A with the presenters. So yeah, we'll directly go to the third and final presentation, and it will be about the joint policy brief on technologies for averting, minimizing and addressing loss and damage in coastal zones. And it was done in collaboration with the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. And it will be presented by Maria, who we heard in the introduction, and Don Pierre Nazionelli. But first, I give the word to Maria, so please, yeah, the virtual stage is yours.
And thank you again for joining this event to launch our publication. I would, in this regard, focus now onto the joint policy brief which focus on the technologies averting, minimizing and reducing loss and damage for coastal zone. We have done this, as mentioned by you, Sarah, and also through the joint work that was undertaken jointly by the Technology Executive Committee and the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee on Loss and Damage as well. Next slide, please. The Technology Executive Committee have worked on several areas where they have issued their policy brief over the last few years. And having said that, we pick our topics not just randomly, but we pick from the base on the synthesis reports that we usually get from the compilation, usually the TNA synthesis report. In this regard, the areas, the priority sectors are the sectors that we usually target to provide the joint the policy intervention for the technology. We have done one of the key policy area that was policy sector that was prioritized in those TNS was water, and then the others, and then the third one which we came across, but we have never done was any policy intervention before, was coastal zone. In this regard, then we thought the Technology Executive Committee thought it would be a good idea to focus this on a coastal zone technologies, and this which is a critical component in the national economies, especially to the coastal countries and coastal zones across the entire world. And also, given there is a high impact on the coastal areas and coastal ecosystems, which it's increasingly disrupted due to the impacts of climate change. In this regard, then what we came across is we jointly worked with this Technology Executive Committee with the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee on Loss and Damage to provide this coastal zone specific tech brief. Next slide, please. Just to provide the brief in a nutshell, there are four chapters in the technology in this joint brief. The first chapter, which is the introduction, that focus about providing contextualizing the issue, and understanding the literature about the hazards or risk and how to provide prevent loss and damage in the coastal zones, and then linking it the matter with the coastal zones and kind of a background of the context of where we are with regards to this brief. The second chapter and the subsequent chapters, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4 focuses on the, it is based on the risk framework that was built by the WIM-Excom, which the chapter 2 focus on the risk assessment. In that framework, it provides that chapter guides at the setting scenes of the key perspective on the types of the existing types of coastal risk assessments that are currently undertaken globally, and provides yes, or through other activities. And in that chapter, there are some opportunities and challenges highlighted to undertake those risk assessments, and particularly those opportunities includes most of the many softwares that are available are freely, but the challenges that there are limited softwares that undertake on the slow onset events, which is the key focus of the loss and damage in the long term. Second slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. With regard to the chapter 3, which focus on the second climate risk framework, which is the risk retention part of it, the technologies for risk retention, we adopt a similar approach as the previous chapter, which set up the scenes and then provides an overview of the types of technology that are, for example, sea walls, storm surge barriers, and these are mostly hard technologies we are talking in this context. And then discuss about the opportunities and challenges which are related to the risk retention. This availability of soft technologies is also one of the opportunities that we have, and the opportunities includes this can be also be a scope benefit associated with the database solution as well, and similarly case studies were also included as well. With regard to the fourth chapter, the recovery and rehabilitation on coastal zone, similarly, so the similar structure. Next slide, please. You can find many examples and case studies in the detailed paper that I hope you would have a time to go through. Just to provide a snapshot of one of the examples for the coastal risk assessment was the IUCN agreement which uses GIS technology as the satellite-based technology used by the JMP Euroset. Next slide, please. With regards to the coastal retention, the climate risk and early warning system hosted by the World Meteorological Organization is helpful for the SIPs and LDCs to undertake these procedures as before. Next slide, please. With regard to the example for the recovery and rehabilitation, the data collection method used for the COBO tool during the recovery and communication, the disaster is also included, and in the assessment framework for the resilience building is also included. Next slide. As a summary, just to provide a summary, the first section we address assess the risk part of it is appropriate methods and tools required to consider the multiple type of hazards, both slow and onset events and governance scales, and countries are working with international partnership and joint efforts and then to provide these coastal risk assessment. the second part.
Thank you, Mario. I think just so that we have more time for the questions and panel discussion, I hope that the audience can read the report afterwards themselves, and we need to go on. So I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I will give the word to Don, if that's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria, for your presentation. And yeah, we will now hear some words from Dawn, and representing the WIM-Excom. And a bit about Dawn is that she is the Deputy Chief Sustainable Development and Environment Officer at the Department of Sustainable Development in St. Lucia, where she supports In 2015, she has served as the thematic coordinator or lead negotiator on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States in the negotiating area of loss and damage. So please, Dawn, you can unmute yourself, and the virtual stage is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for allowing me to say a few words about this important and timely report. First of all, on behalf of the Excom, I would like to welcome the report and dearly thank the joint working group of the Excom and the TEC for their valuable contributions and supreme effort in getting the brief over the line, especially in these trying times. And might I suggest that we consider the possibility of a relaunch event when we are all able to meet again face-to-face. While the idea of this joint policy brief was conceived long before we could have imagined our current circumstances, its release at this time is certainly quite timely. As the Executive Secretary points out in one of the forwards to the report, recovery from COVID-19 and addressing climate change are not mutually exclusive. Indeed, coastal zones are home to about 40% of the world's population living within 100 kilometers from the coastline, including 60% of the world's metropolises, with populations exceeding 5 million people, and 600 million of those live less than 10 meters above sea level. And this is serious. Needless to say, the majority of these people come from developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to loss and damage from the impacts of climate change, and are now facing a future where the unexpected socioeconomic upheaval being caused by the coronavirus will compound the challenges of averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. The aftermath of Cyclone Harold in Vanuatu in April of this year, and the 1-2 punch of Super Cyclone Amphan in May, followed by the extreme monsoon flooding in Bangladesh, are but just a few examples of the extreme vulnerability of nations with extensive coastlines to the multiple risks posed by environmental, social, and economic impacts. To quote the UNFCCC Executive Secretary once again, this joint policy brief on technologies for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage in coastal zones is a pioneering collaborative work. And as a longtime member of the Excom, I am very proud that it had its genesis in Excom's current 5-year work plan, and specifically under its workstream C, aimed at enhancing cooperation and facilitation of action in relation to comprehensive risk management approaches, including risk assessment, risk reduction, risk transfer, risk retention, to address and build long-term resilience of countries, vulnerable populations, and communities to loss and damage, including in relation to extreme and slow onset events. Almost near the end, in my humble humble opinion, as a citizen of a small island developing state from the Caribbean, St. Lucia that is, I believe that this policy brief covers the aim of this workstream very effectively, jointly from the perspectives of providing a synthesis of current knowledge on loss and damage experienced in coastal zones and an overview of hard and soft technologies for averting, minimizing, and addressing it, as well as illustrating good practices from different regions and possible ways for countries to overcome the challenges for scaling up their use. All of these add value to the brief's stated aim of informing policymakers and practitioners on technological solutions to assess and manage climate-related risks comprehensively in coastal zones. In closing, I would like to say that on behalf of the WIM-Excom, we as its members stand ready to support similar collaborative initiatives in the future, both with the TEC as well as with other UNFCCC constituted bodies. Thanks once again to the organizers of this event for providing me with this opportunity to represent the Excom at the launch. On behalf of my co-chair and me, I wish to acknowledge some of the key players of the Excom, namely Nidal, Tekea, Yuchi, as well as Adele and Maria from the TEC. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn, for your words. And thank you for your perspective from the CEST perspective. And what you both mentioned, I heard that you mentioned that we need both hard and soft technologies. And Maria also said that there's very few software on slow onsetting events. So that can be something which is important to support, especially. So now we have a discussion with the presenters, and I encourage you to have a lively discussion, to have an open mind, think broadly, and to respond to each other, so that it's not only me who is asking you questions. And yes, but also we want to have time for the questions from the audience in the Q&A session, so maybe we'll have this around 10 minutes, a bit shorter than thought. So please keep your reply short and concise. Yeah, but I would like to start with the first question, and that is, how can these publications help countries to enhance their NDCs, national adaptation plans, or their national climate strategies to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement? And maybe we'll go in the order of the presenters. So if Sarah wants to start to reply, so how can the publications help the countries?
Thank you, Sarah. And I think, of course, it's always important to share experiences and lessons learned on how to go forward. And I think that is really a key takeaway from the TEC brief on TNA good practices and so forth. So it is really learning from experience and what can we do better and what can we use that have been developed throughout the last years going forward on implementation. And in the question on how to use it to enhance NDCs, I mean, the technology needs assessments are really a tool for articulating ways for reaching a target and what is actually required to reach that target. So with the TNAs, it becomes much more concrete what can be done in terms of reaching a certain target. And with that, you can also say that when you know how to reach a target, you can increase the level of ambition. So I think that's very much about the TNAs and this brief learning how to do better and what are we already doing, which is useful. And that is really key to learn from each other and further advance in implementation.
Yeah, thanks. Stephen?
Is that these processes can assist countries to pursue more ambitious targets and goals. And that, of course, is relevant to NDCs, national adaptation plans, and other planning tools that countries have. So whether it is, for example, making finance more sustainable, such as in the example of green bonds, or the other innovative approaches that we have talked about. It is all about bringing more ambitious targets into reach earlier with technologies that we have, and I think that that is something that I would commend to parties in terms of what this paper can contribute.
Yeah, thanks, Maria, and after that, Juan.
Thank you. And I agree with Sarah and Stefan as well. Lesson learned is learning from each other is an important element as we perceive climate action for our countries. But and these kind of documents, these kind of joint policy briefs helps countries who have not undertaken similar kind of activities or similar kind of I would say use technologies. They can use these technologies in their proposals when they submit for along with the bankable project, so that there can be a huge replica of there is an opportunity for replication of these good experiences elsewhere across the globe. That would help create the butterfly effect of the climate action generate on particularly on small and reasonable cost as well. So that would be the first takeaway that I would say. Thank you.
Okay. Bob, would you like to comment as well?
I think the thing about going last is that it's been all said. But for many countries that are preparing their NAP, they go through a prioritization process. And I believe this technology publications can help them in that prioritization process. Because certainly for all of the sectors, whether you're talking about water, fisheries, infrastructure, agriculture, health, education, tourism, you need technologies. So regardless of the sector, it is important for the NAP. Likewise for NDCs, as countries look at technologies, whether it be electric vehicles or they're looking at photovoltaic systems, you need the technologies to be able to help you reduce your emissions, to be able to help you address, to deal with adaptation, address loss and damage, sea level rise, etc. So indeed, those technology guides are critical in helping countries to be able to get to where they need to get to in terms of their prioritization process and their policies, strategies, and action plans.
Yeah, thank you. Now I have another question, and as I'm representing Yago, so the youth, I would like to address a question related to that. So I know that many, saw that many of these, or at least roughly, publications mention the involvement of stakeholders, and stakeholders is broad and then maybe never exactly defined who are the stakeholders, but I would like to see that young people are definitely one important group of stakeholders. I'd like to ask you, how do you see the role of young people to push for the implementation of technology? I don't go through a certain order, so I just let anyone who wants to speak and reply to the question. Where do you see us? How can young people be involved in the implementation, development, and transfer of climate technologies? Let me see if you can just unmute yourself and speak if you want.
I guess I can go. I wasn't sure if somebody else was going. Yes, I do believe there is a role for young people. We know of when you look at Article 6 under the convention, or you look at Article 12 under the Paris Agreement, there's clear role for young people and for just action for climate empowerment on the whole, where everyone needs to be involved. And I would say especially young people, because they are the future of tomorrow, but I would say the future of today. But further to that international effort where they can be involved, I think there is a lot of room for them in the national arena. There are lots of young people going to study their first degrees, their masters, their PhDs, etc. And governments often have priority lists of areas of focus, areas of importance. It would be very good if those areas embrace technology as
Yes, very briefly. I mean, I absolutely agree with Dawn. Participation is vital at national, local, international levels. The younger participation in the process of the TEC and the UN processes more broadly is vital. But on the one hand, it's about keeping the pressure on policymakers. I remember last year's march in New York. The series of manifestations last year changed the world in a sense, but the pressure has to stay on. But it's not all about pressure. Young people don't need to wait. Young people in many parts of the world are policymakers, are entrepreneurs, are learning and applying their knowledge. So I think that it's a mixture of these different things. And of course, there's no one single thing.
Yeah, thank you. I see that Sarah also would like to say something.
Yeah, no, and while I agree with everything that has been said, I also just want to come with one concrete example from the technology needs assessment. In Liberia, which is currently undertaking their TNAs, they concretely have representatives from the youth community in their working group. So it is actually youth representatives who are taking part in prioritizing technologies, discussing challenges and opportunities and so forth. And I think it is really critical to involve youth representatives or young people also in these processes, because there are really different ideas and different types of knowledge that are then being included in the discussion. So it is concretely being done in those countries undertaking their TNAs.
Nice to hear that example that young people are represented in those groups. Thank you. And yeah, Marie, you want to say something as well?
Thank you. I agree with all the comments that made by all the panelists, but I just want to add one more element to it. Advocacy remains a critical thing that youth has provided in pressured the policymakers to make an inclusive policy that encompass their justice as well. And in that regard, in most of the case studies that has been selected in these publications, they happen to have a key engagement of youth, in particular, in not only in the upper level where there is a policymaker, but actually the implementing level, where they have the hands-on role to actually make the change on the ground, which is the most critical part that is happening. So active role of youth in those implementation part is more crucial. Those could be changing the impacts and move those feedbacks up to the policy level will change the thing, but the active role of youth at the implementation is crucial, I would say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yes, now we will go on to the questions from the audience, and we have already received some questions. And yeah, as you see, we're a little bit behind schedule, so we might need to run out a little bit over schedule, but that's just because we want to have a chance to reply to your questions. So you can still reply or submit your questions using the Q&A button on your screen. But I see that we already have some questions coming in. One is about the question, what is the difference between NAMAs and NDCs? And maybe Sarah would like to respond to that. Or also someone else, feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you for that question. Well, the NAMAs are really a tool for developing countries to identify and articulate actions to reduce emissions. And you can say it is a set of mitigation actions, which is including technologies, finance and capacity building activities. And in that sense, it comes closer to technology action plans than to NDCs, whereas NDCs are not solely for developing countries, but across all countries. And it is more broader and less specific plans than the NAMAs. So that would be the short question on that.
Yeah, thank you. Then I also have a question related to the innovative approaches presentation. And you mentioned the case study on green bonds, I believe on Fiji. So given the current market volatility, how useful are green and sustainable bonds to support green recovery efforts?
Yes, it's a very good question. What we have seen in the last 6 months is that green bonds have an important role to play in just why we're seeing this. Because this is a tested way of funding proven business models, proven technologies. So countries around the world are facing the humanitarian crisis of the pandemic, but they're also facing the challenge of building back better. And debt finance, including bonds, is a very important element of how that can be done. And we're seeing that from the private sector, from sovereigns, but also from development banks. So I think green bonds have an important role to play, amongst other financial tools.
Thank you. I have another question which is related to the joint policy brief on coastal technologies. So how will the TEC and WIM support and implement these technologies on the ground in vulnerable countries?
Thank you, Sarah. And I would assume Dawn would also come in and support me and edit few things as well. But I see the policy document has a lot of recommendations as well as opportunities where the countries can come up and learn from what is already existing, and then can build based on those case studies that are demonstrated as well. And there are a lot of other avenues where they can be get supported on those projects. And on the other hand as well, they can also use these documents to shape their plans. For example, like when they, as John has also mentioned about, when they come up with their prioritization process, this documentation would be at their fingertips to ensure that their recommended policies are being integrated into the national level as well. And yeah, thank you.
Yes, yeah, the WIM-Excom is already assisting in this regard and is doing some more is coming. We have, some of them have been launched and some of them are to be launched. Certainly the WIM-Excom is a repository for information such as this that would be very useful. But we also know that we have the risk talk that provides interactive advice from various experts. So that is an avenue that is already available. We also have the Fiji Clearinghouse for risk transfer that is again available as an avenue to assist in this regard. There are various technical expert groups. The one for the comprehensive risk management has been established, and that is another avenue. But we are also expecting to establish those on action and support, which includes finance technology and capacity building, as well as those for slow onset events and non-economic losses, all of which are relevant, and all of which will be developing plans of action that will try to incorporate actions and activities to be able to assist in this regard. We also have a mandate from the parties in terms of the development of technical guides. So that is another avenue that we'll be working on. And of course, I know that we all know of the Santiago network based on the decision coming out of the last COP, and that the pages for this have been recently launched, and that is an avenue for technical support to developing countries that will hopefully be able to reach on the ground in the way that we would like to see happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Dawn. Nice. So I'll just have one more last question. Maybe we can just have one or two respondents. So it is general, not related to any specific topic. The question is intellectual property a barrier to the transfer of climate technologies? And if anyone would like to respond to that? Yeah.
If I may, thank you for that. We are currently, the Technology Executive Committee is developing barriers and enablers paper, so it might come out after that as well. So we can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just quick reply from Sarah and Stephen, and then we go on to Mentimeter polling. So in the audience, make sure to have your Menti website up and running, and I'll give the word to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted to note that usually it is not something that comes up very often when looking into countries' technology priorities. Often it is technologies that are available in their countries or in the region even that needs to be scaled up. So it is typically not the main barrier, the IPRs, I would say.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen?
Yes, on the question of intellectual property, I would refer people interested to the work of WIPO Green from the World International Property Organization. So they are also an observer in the TEC's work, and they are doing some interesting work in this regard.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, we will now it's soon time to run off, but first we'll have Mentimeter polling with 3 questions. And so go to the website again, www., or if you have the same, you can just click refresh, and yeah, now you should be able to see the first question. So, and yeah, so this final Mentimeter is to try to be more concrete and look forward after this. So the question is, which existing technology should be prioritized for replication and upscaling in your country? And please answer in maximum 2 words. And then we'll give you some seconds, so we wait for the results to come in. Which existing technology should be prioritized for replication and upscaling in your country? Yeah. And I see we have some questions already popping, or some replies popping in. Again, as in the beginning, when you think about climate technologies, we have renewable energy. But as we heard in the presentation, I mean, climate technology is not only renewable energy. There are many other technologies as well. Some other responses say energy efficiency, solar PV, renewable energy, or RE. I'll wait a bit longer. And otherwise, we will go to the next question. Yeah, and here you see the code again if you need to enter it again. So it's 277637. Yes. Yeah, I will see. Yeah, maybe we can launch the next question. If not, more responses are coming in. Yes, here I can see the new question at least. If you can make up a vision of the future, which climate technology do you see as most relevant in 30 years? And we can relate it to, for example, there are many, we heard about innovative approaches, but you can also think about innovative technologies. Do you see climate technologies in the future which already exist today? Or do you think that we will have many new or very different technologies in the future which haven't been so much explored today? And we see that many responses are already coming in. So we see food and agriculture, the bicycle, energy saving, sustainable transport, smart agriculture. I think that, yeah, a little bit more. Smart planning also. Okay. And precision farming, green bottlenecks. Yeah. So we have, we have some different interesting answers, I think, about what climate technologies you see as most relevant in 30 years. We'll see if the third and final Menti question is being launched soon. And it's for you to leave an impression about the publications. Yes. Yes, and there we go. So please answer in maximum 2 words about the publications. So yeah, thank you very much for your participation. I'll read out some examples about your impressions and the publications. We see they're informative, useful, need to read more. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. People have gotten a small taste of it, of what they imply today, so you can always read them in full, or most of them have some kind of executive summary. If you don't have the full time, you can also read the summaries. Very informative. I'll read it for sure. Too lengthy. Okay. Q&A is interesting. Relevant topics and good read. Okay. Good. So yeah, I'll just say, yeah, thank you very much for attending this virtual event. I hope that you learned a lot of new things. I'm also glad for the presenters to share their views on how young people can be included in the process to develop and implement climate technologies. And from the youth perspective, I'd like to say that we are really keen and engaged and would like to be involved more. So we're always open for if you want to reach out through Yango. Finally, I would like to encourage every one of you to read the publications, share them and use them. There are many recommendations to different types of actors. So try to really think about if you can follow them and bring those recommendations up in your organization. And the TEC will also continue its work to make more useful publications. And even if the pandemic is changing the way that the TEC works, so we do more virtual events, for example. But that's everything from my side. Thank you for staying these extra minutes, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day and the week, and see you hopefully again in the next TEC virtual events. There will become more virtual events, so keep an eye out for information about those. Yeah, I end here. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.